a WFSB Plus original. This is the Capitol Rundown.
Welcome to the Capitol Rundown. This is where we're bringing you politics from both sides of the aisle. And we've got Themis Klarides for the former House Republican leader and Jimmy Tickey, Democratic strategist. I'm Kara Sundlin, and we're going to talk about everything that's making news right now. Certainly lots going on, but let's first talk about the governor's race. And there's even perhaps another person entering that we haven't been reporting on as much yet. Themis, let's start with you.
Well, on the Republican side, we know Ryan Fazio, sitting Senator Ryan Fazio, and former mayor of New Britain, Aaron Stewart, have announced they're running. But now we've heard that the former lieutenant governor in New York State, under Governor Pataki, Betsy McCoy, is seriously thinking about opening an exploratory committee and seeing, testing the waters.
Okay.
I mean, she's a very smart person who has been in politics for many years. Again, she was lieutenant governor. She sits on a lot of think tanks. She writes for the New York Post. She's been involved in the Trump campaign. And I'm assuming she's thinking about it because she thinks that the field that we have now, is open. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah. Jimmy?
Well, of course, the governor is running again for re-election for this third term. It loves the job, is having fun, and has made his intentions known about running again. And so, of course, Democrats are with the governor, and he does very well, with polling. I mean, even Republicans, honestly, are supportive of this governor. He's generally popular, over 50% now in his seventh or eighth year, in office, running now for a third term. There is another Democrat running, a state representative, Josh Elliott. But I think for the most part, the field is set, and you're seeing the governor, who's generally very popular, will coast through the next year.
I wouldn't be surprised if the other Republicans, somebody else popped up too. I mean,
You think that it's possible? It's still, in the world of politics, is this still very early?
Very early.
but late at the same time.
I think for Republicans, look, in my opinion, Republicans are going to move to the right as much as they can and try to get the base of Republicans, and that is who typically votes in a primary, in a primary where that usually your base of voters, and they're going to be running to get the support of President Trump, which will ultimately not be helpful to them in a general election in Connecticut.
Yes, case in point. And that's the problem, though. But that's the problem
For Republicans in Connecticut?
For Republicans in general with President Trump. There are states that if you get the president's endorsement, that basically guarantees you'll win a general election. Connecticut is not one of those states. And we have turned into a state where you need to be very pro-Trump to win a primary, and that will almost guarantee you can't win a general election. And so that's where, there are other states that aren't like that. Our state, northeastern states, are much more like that than others, and that's where the difficulty comes in.
Do you see any weaknesses for Governor Lamont?
I mean, everybody has weaknesses. I mean, they will say, I mean, I've heard them, and we've talked about them before, to say that he protects his wealthy friends. He's not putting quote unquote millionaires tax and making people who make more money pay more money, which is not true, because clearly with an income tax the size that we have in Connecticut, the more money you make, the more money you pay. The housing bill he just signed, or he's signing, so that was a big criticism of him from the Democrat side, particularly the more to the left of the Democrat side. He signed that, which is something that I and other Republicans really didn't agree with. So there's always going to be criticisms. Like, there's no perfect candidate, there's no perfect elected official. You could always find things about everybody you don't like, but I think that's the biggest struggle, that in Connecticut, we still have high taxes. It is still a very high cost of living. It's hard for people, to find places to live, and the job market is as it is. So those are the criticisms that the Republicans will levy against him, and have already.
Jimmy, what's the state, from your perspective, why is Governor Lamont enjoying such a high approval rating? And when the economy is a big issue all around America, what would you say the state is here?
I still think people think back to the COVID time and how well Connecticut handled that, and how out front the governor was every single day, and really managing it well with the legislature and with his emergency management and with the team around him. And I think people began to give him very high marks around that time, when we were really in distress as a state. And really, Connecticut was one of the best managed states during that time. And then you see the record surpluses approaching $10 billion paid down in the pension debts. That's very good for our long long-term health and well-being financially in the state. You look at a rainy day fund that is over $4 billion, approaching $5 billion. That gives the state the wherewithal to meet the needs of people in this age of President Trump and the cuts that we are seeing from the federal government, the state having more abilities to now help others and help the most vulnerable. So I think people see what he's done financially as pretty much a fiscal conservative, or at least moderation, and that is appealing to people that may not be hard left or hard right, or Republican or Democrat, but by and large say, you know, I think he's done a good job, and I think they will see this next year through and support him in the 2026 election.
But let's remember that those surpluses that Jimmy talks about were Republican-led initiatives, and in 2017, the budget that was passed then, the Democrats fought us tooth and nail. And if it hadn't been for Republicans having almost, you know, a tie in the Senate and 4 votes extra in the House, that would have never passed, because those caps, budget caps, you know, spending, borrowing, all that kind of thing, were Republican initiatives for decades in Connecticut. I mean, I know because I was there when we put them in, and they never passed because the Democrats never wanted their hands tied. And so when we passed those in 2017, it allowed us to do it. Now, the Democrats have been trying to break those and spend more and more money every time. And to the governor's credit, he has more or less held the line with that. And so I think that will be a benefit to him.
The fiscal conservative, but also because he has that businessman background, but also socially and otherwise align with a lot of the middle ground folks in Connecticut.
Yeah, and our Connecticut values.
So let's move on now to SNAP, because we're talking about how the governor has helped, the governor and the legislature has helped give people money when the federal government was shut down and taking away SNAP benefits during that period of time. Now, the latest is that President Trump would like to tie the hands of Democratic states and not give them any SNAP benefit money unless they hand over data he wants that would help ICE. So, Themis, what do you think of that?
Well, the president wants the names and the immigration status of people that qualify for SNAP in each state. Now, each state makes the determination on who will qualify for SNAP. And for example, Connecticut, we're towards the top on being, you know, giving people more people SNAP than other states. You know, Vermont, I think, is the #1. You know, and then I think maybe Wyoming, don't hold me to that, maybe the least. But, you know, states do it in different ways. So it's a range of how much money you make, whether you qualify or not. So he wants that information. And there are 29 states that have provided the information thus far. There are 22 states that said, no way, and we're filed a lawsuit. Because remember, this was back in February that he first asked for it. And a federal judge actually said, you do not have to give this information. So that's what they're all relying on now. You know, the bigger issue to me is fraud, and I think it's a real thing. Secretary Rollins actually came out and said, of the 42 million people that receive SNAP in this country, around 186, I believe, thousand have been found to have been deceased. And then that
are still getting benefits.
Yes, and 500,000 of them are double dipping, you know, so getting more than what they're supposed to be getting for a single person. So I will tell you, as somebody who has been involved in this, in writing budgets and putting in bills that say we need to get rid of this fraud, as government, it's our job to make sure we take care of the people that need to be taken care of. And there's fraud in everything. And there's every social program, there's going to be fraud. And those numbers don't seem like huge numbers, but it matters, right? Because not only are you protecting the people that need protection by giving them these services, but you're also protecting the taxpayers to make sure their money is being used in a fiscally responsible way.
So do you think that Trump should get the information?
You know, I mean, the federal judge has ruled that is not information they should get, but I will tell you this. The immigration status, the problem with immigration status, I know Jimmy and I have talked about this on this show before, that there are people that are supposed to legally be in this country, but that's because under Joe Biden, some of those people just were let in, right? And they weren't necessarily supposed to be let in. And so you have this whole group of people that, you know, we want as much legal immigration as possible. That's my position on this. I want as many people to be citizens or legally here as long as they do it the right way and they go through the right channels. But we've got this whole pool of people under, you know, former President Biden that just were let in. And so, you know, you end up with this gray area. And I think that we should know their immigration status because we need to know if they're supposed to be getting these. But the states are arguing that they do this on their own And so why should we have to give up personal information? And if the court is saying it's not legal to give up personal information, then, the law speaks for itself.
Jimmy?
States should not have to give this information over. States verify these SNAP benefits. They verify at the point that a person or a family goes to apply for these benefits. So it's really more of a question about how is your state handling this. I trust Connecticut to handle it well. States verify it, and as Themis said, this is about courts even then agreeing to say, you know what, states do not have to hand over this very sensitive information to a Trump White House who has been going after people in the streets, rounding people up, people erroneously who were citizens who should not have been rounded up on the streets, and you see the cruelty and the harm that this White House has done. So often with President Trump, you will find that these sorts of things are a distraction to take away from his own failings, his own administration's failings, to go after the rising costs of goods, fraud, waste, and abuse in their own administration, secretaries getting private jets, demolishing half of the White House and building a $300 million ballroom. So I think so much with this president is nothing but a distraction.
All right, well, let's move on to the New Hampshire primary, because eventually there's going to be a new president, and you are watching this. And you're watching ahead, and this is obviously very much ahead, but we're talking about it because midterms are coming up, and everything that Trump does is a question, is he lame duck, and who's next? But the New Hampshire primary there's some information coming out that's going to already start to shape this race. Tell us about that.
Yes. So for those thinking this is so far away, keep in mind we are having a midterm election in 2026 that decides the Senate and the House, and then just beyond that, you will have a presidential election in 2028. Why that is important is because New Hampshire was always the first in the country as those primaries for both parties, and that did change in 2020 under then President Biden. New Hampshire was not first, they were second. South Carolina went first. There are some conversations happening with our national parties, of which I'm involved in the Democratic National Committee, about seeing what does that schedule look like. And it right now looks pretty good that New Hampshire might get back to their first in the nation placement, which selfishly for us in Connecticut is nice because we will see more, I think, candidates of both parties come through Connecticut more often, more regularly, if they're heading up to New Hampshire to campaign. And Connecticut was able to move up our primary from late April to early April. I know some people would still want it even earlier than that, but I think we will see more action in Connecticut from a presidential primary perspective in 2028.
And I want to get Themis's take, but before we do that, move on, that we actually have a Connecticut senator who's polling already as a presidential candidate?
Yes. Well, Senator Chris Murphy has been traveling around the country, he has been going to New Hampshire. And look, it is a ways away, but the polls are always fun because it gives people who really enjoy politics a sense of trying to see, who's doing well, who's resonating. I think right now in New Hampshire, the top candidates are Pete Buttigieg, who had run before, as well as Gavin Newsom. But Senator Murphy is polling in New Hampshire, and these things are way off, and there's a way to go from 1% to 5% to 10%. And in a very fractured field, you could do well with even a segment of the population.
Themis, I know you have lots to say.
Well, I mean, listen, we've seen, as Jimmy said, Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom are polling very similar, 28, 24%. And that makes sense because, first of all, Pete Buttigieg ran for president once. So he has some national ID, name ID. He also was a secretary under President Biden. So he had more name ID. And Gavin Newsom has been out every day doing everything all the time. So, I mean, they have the ID. Chris Murphy certainly is acting like somebody who is interested in running for president. And he has been acting that way for a while and certainly is right. I mean, lots of senators are interested in running for president. He has every right to do it as anybody else did. His numbers are very low at this point versus, he's at 1%, I think. They're at 28, 24. But those numbers can change. Right? They can change pretty quickly once people start paying attention. On the Republican side, J.D. Vance is way ahead of everybody else. Marco Rubio, other Republicans are like way in the single digits. But this it's a data point, right? It's where we start, and we're going to be watching this. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this many times on the show because things will start changing. But the fact of the matter is, name ID is a big deal. And that's why those people's name ID, I mean, clearly a sitting vice president would be polling first. That's not a big surprise. And I don't think Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom are a surprise either.
Right, and I think New Hampshire's a lot like Connecticut in that they really appreciate retail politicking, which is when you go out and you actually meet real people. These states are small enough where you could send a candidate in and have them go to a diner and meet with people and talk with people about the issues that matter.
Do you think having New Hampshire first will be good for Connecticut?
It's not going to hurt. part of our issue is, moving the primary from the end of April to the beginning of April, it was an improvement, but it's still pretty late. And it's a small state, right? So there's not a lot of electoral votes. But the difference with Connecticut is we have a lot of candidates come through here because there's a lot of money here. And they all want to raise money here. So if our primaries are a little earlier, that's going to add a little more interest for candidates to come here and actually engage with people.
Yeah, and spend money at the hotels and the restaurants and everything else. Okay, so just in our last thing, I want to bring this up. It's something we've been covering in depth, and that is homeschooling in Connecticut. And we're going to probably hear a lot about this. Look forward to, we're going to be taking Capitol Rundown live for the opening session, talking about everything that's making news in Connecticut and what laws could change. Do you think because of the Waterbury captivity case where a man was held captive for 20 years, now we have Jacqueline Torres Garcia, little Mimi, she was found dead in a plastic container. Her mother is accused of murdering her. Again, she was put into a homeschooling situation after there was even some evidence of abuse going on with DCF. So homeschooling is back in the news of how do we protect children if there's no teachers or no one around to do mandatory reporting? Do you think the politics are right that there's going to be changes in Connecticut, which has the most liberal homeschooling laws, I guess, in the country? Themis?
Well, session doesn't begin till the first week of February this year, but there will absolutely be many, many people putting in bills to change these laws. And again, as you mentioned, we have one of the most liberal homeschooling laws, meaning you don't have to do a lot if you're going to take your child out and homeschool your child at home. Now, in my opinion, certainly you have the right to do that. That should be something a parent has a right to do, but there also needs to be some parameters. So we can also keep track of what's going on, making sure they're learning properly, making sure they're being taken care of. And we saw what happened in Waterbury with that boy who turned into a man, and the horrible tragedy that happened with him, and in New Britain. There's got to be some checks and balances. The parents don't want any checks and balances. Government may want a ton of checks and balances. There's got to be somewhere in the middle where we say, parents, you have the right to school your children, but we have to actually, be able to keep an eye on what's going on to a certain extent.
For the safety of the child. Jimmy, what's your thought? Is this a bipartisan agreement situation?
I think it can be, and hopefully it is, that there is some compromise that can be made to make sure that students that are homeschooled are learning and are safe. You can have those sorts of regular check-ins when a student goes to a public school or a private school because they are being seen every day. But what can be done to make sure, even for students that are homeschooled, they are learning and that they are safe in the environments that they are in? And there should be some sort of regularity. As you point out, we are one of the most lax states with this kind of schooling. And so what can be done so that there's some sort of regular format and order that we can make sure that we're checking in on youngsters and making sure that they're safe at home.
Does it seem strange to you that we're very lax? Because we do have a lot of regulations.
It seems very strange to me as somebody who has dealt with these bills that have gone through in the past. It seems very strange to me that we over-regulate so many things in Connecticut. I think to the detriment of people in certain examples. In this, we have no regulation at all. I think we need to allow DCF and then police more ability to keep an eye on what's going on, in addition to the Department of Education, so that everybody's working hand in hand. The goal here is not to control people and regulate them. The goal here is to make sure kids are safe, educated, fed well. The things that you do when you have children. We operate on the Latin term in loco parentis when you go to a school, because that means when you are in school, the children are in the hands of the teachers, the administrators, in place of the parent. We should still be in place of the parent, even if the parent is homeschooling them, right?
Right, with the goal to be that no one slips through the cracks.
Right. As two cases of horrible cases here in Connecticut. Just wanted to bring that up because I know we're going to talk a lot more about it. Thank you all for joining us for the Capitol Rundown. You can always find us streaming for free on WFSB Plus, also on our WFSB YouTube channel. And give Themis Klarides and Jimmy Tickey a follow on social media, and myself as well. We like to post about it there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you on Eyewitness News coming up at 4.